My name is Christian Roberts, the youth pastor of the Christian Tabernacle Baptist Church in Hamden, Connecticut, and I'd like to welcome you to the Christian Corner. I am so glad that you were able to join us for part 2 of this month's series, Roots. We talk about building a firm foundation for a brighter future. Now, let's take a look at the scripture for today's message, Dirty Deeds. One thing that I constantly find myself doing is binging YouTube videos. I'll see a video pop up on my feed, just throw it on thinking I'm going to watch and get off, but then that list of suggested videos will start calling my name. I'll click on a second video, then a third, then an eighth, and next thing I know, I will spend hours laid up watching videos. There's all kinds of content that I enjoy watching. I like comedy videos, old movie clips, random videos that went viral, but some of my favorites are the beef history videos put out by Sports Nation. This series of videos focuses on sports figures, both past and present, who have butted heads for various reasons. Beef History shares all kinds of stories about trash talk during games, shady comments on social media, and all kinds of drama. And sometimes it's hard to believe. It's crazy to think that these professional athletes and coaches who make millions of dollars and are viewed by countless fans on a weekly basis really beef with each other and have these intense conflicts that last for years and even decades. But in that sense, they're just like all of us. Because I'm sure that everyone listening to the sound of my voice can think of someone that we've had a falling out with. Someone who came at us in a way that we didn't appreciate. Someone who did us dirty. It may have been a parent, a former friend, a co-worker, or a church member, but whoever it was, our view of them was probably altered in the process. We likely started to see them in a new light. Maybe we lost respect for them, stopped wanting a relationship with them, and even developed hatred for them. And when it happened, it may have made us feel angry, devastated, or confused. Because someone that we expected to be close or at least civil with acted in a way that impacted us and our relationship and maybe even our lives as a whole. And one of the most famous instances of beef in the entire Bible came between David and King Saul. However, when David and Saul first encounter each other, this is actually far from the case. The first time that David and Saul meet comes when David's a teenager and he steps in during this grand standoff between the Israelites and the Philistines and kills Goliath, the strongest and fiercest Philistine in their entire army. And after this, David becomes the man in Israel. Everybody knows his name. They sing songs about him. He's on magazine covers and video games. He's doing talk shows. He has influence and power. Everybody is rocking with David. Everyone except for King Saul, because King Saul was feeling insecure about David's rise to fame. He wasn't too comfortable with how beloved David was in the nation that he had been ruling for so long. So King Saul decides to keep his friends close and his enemies closer. He offers David an opportunity to marry his daughter Merab and become part of the royal family. But David turns down the offer, insisting that he's not worthy to be the king's son-in-law. And David's humility causes him to become even more popular in Israel, which irks Saul's nerves. Time goes on, and eventually another one of King Saul's daughters, Michal, falls in love with David, and they get married. David also becomes best friends with King Saul's son, Jonathan, and King Saul's jealousy grows because he realizes that because of how charming and lovable David is, having him in the royal family was actually a bad idea. For years, the tension builds, and Saul is desperate to get rid of David. But the thing is, he doesn't want to lose favor in Israel by killing David. So he would instead send David on these really dangerous and pointless missions just to get him killed. But David kept finding ways to not only survive, but strive, and he'd become even more popular in the process. King Saul's irritation grows and grows, not only because David is universally loved, not just because he keeps surviving through these tasks, but because his own children, Michal and David, keep helping David slip through Saul's fingers. And Saul gets to a point where he's so fed up that he just snaps one night during dinner because even his own family was siding with David. He declares that David is too great a threat to his kingdom and that he must die. King Saul storms off, and Jonathan then FaceTimes David and tells him, "Listen, my dad has lost it. He won't rest until he kills you. David, you're going to have to leave town." No, it's worse than that. David, you have to leave the country. David, after doing nothing wrong, has to fear for his life. He has to leave his wife, possessions, and entire life as he knows it behind to become a fugitive because the very man that he fought for and risked his life for was out to kill him. David has to live each day carefully thinking about each move he makes, knowing that at any given moment he could be just moments away from Saul killing him. David was isolated, separated from the very country that he fought for time and again, left without his wife or all that he had, all because of King Saul. And after 2 years of living life on the run, David and Saul would cross paths once again. Saul and his men were out on the hunt, looking to find and kill David, when right in the middle of this tense murder mission, Saul, the king of the nation, lets everybody know you gotta go to the bathroom. So Saul goes to handle his business, and as this is happening, David and the men that had been with him on this journey see King Saul and realize he's vulnerable and unprotected. And David's men immediately start telling him about how God orchestrated all of this to give David an opportunity to kill Saul and get his life back. After all, David didn't go out of his way to find and murder Saul. And if the roles were reversed, he knows that Saul would kill him without hesitation. And besides, after all that Saul did and how he acted, and all that he put David through, Saul deserved it, didn't he? And yet in this moment, in which so many of us would have said, "Oh, bet, thanks for the heads up," and then leave it this chance to kill Saul, and felt good about doing so, David chooses not to. And on top of this, he forbids any of his men from harming Saul. And I'm sure that all of David's men heard this and were shocked. I'm sure they couldn't believe that David, of all people, was turning down this chance. And David's actions here are so powerful because of the reality that whenever we have a beef, an opportunity will become present for us to launch an attack. There will be times in which we can say or do something to even the score. Yet, what David realized is that while getting even might feel good for a second, and checking people might make us feel empowered, and giving people what we think they deserve can be justified by our own logic and understanding, when we give into that temptation and pull that stunt for revenge, or wish harm and failure on those that we dislike, or act cold and hostile rather than gracious, all we become is someone who does not embody the nature of Christ. Because when we choose to let bitterness take control, we will become the kind of person who places the opportunity to retaliate and avenge ourselves above the opportunity to be like Jesus. The Bible tells us that after David chooses not to kill Saul and orders his men not to, he approaches Saul and cuts off a piece of his robe. And after David has done this, he says, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord." David feels guilty about cutting a piece of Saul's clothing. He literally believes that he had dishonored God by doing it. And for the longest time, this was so confusing for me. Because Saul literally ran David out of his own country, away from his entire family, and was constantly searching for and trying to kill him, just because he was envious of David's popularity. And now David found Saul in a vulnerable position and could have killed him, but didn't. He could have had his men kill him, but didn't. All he does is cut a piece of Saul's robe, and now he feels awful. Yet, this is so powerful because so often when we get into conflicts and others do us wrong, we give ourselves a license to sin and act a fool, all while telling ourselves that the way that we're acting is okay because of how we were treated. So often we give ourselves a pass to do anything, say anything, and act any old kind of way because someone else started it. Yet, what made David a man after God's own heart is the fact that even after he had been violated on the deepest of levels by Saul, he was still able to remain reflective of his own behavior. He was the kind of person who could experience hurt and know that he had been mistreated, and know that the predicaments that he found himself in and the sorrow that he was made to feel was undeserved, but still make it a priority to uphold his character. What David knew is that however he conducted himself in that moment, when the dust settled and the rush of the moment passed, he would still have to live with. And this is a word for those of us at odds with people that we'll cross paths with again. Because no matter how things have played out previously, or what has been done to us, or how reckless and inconsiderate others have been, the way we respond and conduct ourselves matters. We still have to look in the mirror and face the person that we see, and live with our decisions, and remember our actions and comments. And we have to go into these moments with the understanding that God never says that two wrongs make a right. So Saul finishes using the bathroom, and then he and David come face to face for the first time in years. They see each other, and David bows before Saul, acknowledging his position as the king. And then, after all that has happened, David finally speaks his piece. He starts out by expressing that someone must have given Saul some kind of false information that made him do all of this. And then he expresses that the way things have played out, God allowed David to have a clean shot at Saul. That if David had wanted to, he could have killed Saul and been free of all this drama. But he chose not to. Then he shows Saul the piece of his robe that he cut off as evidence of this. And he wraps all of this up by saying, "The Lord judge between me and thee, and the Lord avenge me of thee, but mine hand shall not be upon thee." David let Saul know that he's not going to kill him or fight him, but he was going to let God deal with Saul's behavior. And right here, David does what we have to bring ourselves to do when we have beef. Release the wrongs committed to God. To let go of the desire to settle the score. And to realize that it's not our job to set people straight. It's never our responsibility to even things out. It's not a good use of our energy to seek retribution. But we have to lean on the truth that vengeance is the Lord's, that He has seen all that's been done to us. He already knows what they did, and He is capable of handling it far better than we ever could. In this season, God is calling us to resist the urge to be petty, to say no when the voice in our head is telling us to recompense evil for evil, and to live knowing that He'll handle the deeds done against us.